When Dr. Phil saw that diary, he stopped the tape, turned to the camera, and said, "Stop everything." His hand went up. The studio went silent. Production crew froze mid-step. The audience held their breath. Because what was written in those pages wasn't just a story, it was evidence. Evidence of 20 years of silence. 20 years of pain. 20 years of a secret that was about to shatter everything. What happened next became the most watched moment in the show's history. 48 hours earlier, a woman named Sarah had walked into the Dr. Phil studio like any other guest. She was 42 years old, dressed in a simple blue cardigan, her hands trembling slightly as she filled out the pre-interview forms. The producers had been told she wanted to talk about family estrangement. Standard fare for the show. Or so they thought. Sarah had brought a small leather bag with her. Inside was a diary, weathered brown, with pages yellowed by time. She clutched it throughout the entire pre-production process. When a production assistant asked if she needed to store it somewhere safe, Sarah shook her head. "This stays with me," she said quietly. "Always." The show was scheduled to tape at 2 p.m. Standard format. Sarah would sit in the guest chair, Dr. Phil would ask questions, they'd explore the family dynamics, maybe bring out a family member for confrontation or reconciliation. The crew had done this hundreds of times. But Dr. Phil noticed something immediately when Sarah walked onto that stage. She wasn't just nervous. She was terrified. Her hands gripped that leather bag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes kept darting to the audience, then to the exits, then back to the diary. Dr. Phil had interviewed thousands of people over his career. He knew fear when he saw it. This wasn't stage fright. This was something else entirely. "Sarah," Dr. Phil began, his voice gentle but direct. "Tell me why you're here today." Sarah opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. No words came out. The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't unusual. Many guests struggled at first. But Dr. Phil leaned forward in his chair, his entire focus narrowing to this one woman who was clearly fighting an internal battle. "Take your time," he said. "We're not going anywhere." Sarah's hand moved to the leather bag in her lap. She unzipped it slowly, carefully, like she was defusing a bomb. And then she pulled out the diary. The moment that diary appeared, something in Dr. Phil's expression changed. He sat back slightly. His eyes locked onto that worn brown book. Years of experience told him that physical objects brought to his stage always meant something significant. Letters. Photographs. Medical records. But diaries were different. Diaries were windows into souls that people usually kept locked. "What is that, Sarah?" Dr. Phil asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew it was important. "This?" Sarah's voice cracked. "This is every day of my life from age 12 to age 32. Every single day." The studio went quiet. Not the polite quiet of an attentive audience, but the heavy quiet of people sensing they were about to witness something profound. Dr. Phil leaned forward again. "And you brought it here today because I need someone to know," Sarah whispered. "I need someone to finally know what really happened." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Sarah opened the diary to a page marked with a faded ribbon. Her hands shook as she began to read. Her voice was barely audible, but the studio microphones picked up every word. June 14th, 1994. Dad came home angry again. Mom said it was my fault for leaving my shoes in the hallway. I tried to hide in my room, but he found me. I'm writing this in the closet. I can still hear him yelling downstairs. The audience gasped. Dr. Phil's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, letting Sarah continue. September 2nd, 1995. Mom told me if I tell anyone about what happens in this house, they'll take me away and put me in foster care where worse things happen. She said I should be grateful. So I write it here instead. At least the diary listens. Sarah's voice grew stronger with each entry, as if reading them aloud was releasing something that had been compressed for decades. March 17, 1998. I'm 16 now. Everyone at school thinks I'm weird because I don't talk much. But how can I tell them? How can I explain that my house isn't a home? That I count the days until I can leave? 847 days until I turn 18. I'm counting. Dr. Phil raised his hand. Stop the tape. The entire production ground to a halt. Cameras stopped moving. The audience looked around in confusion. In 20 years of hosting this show, Dr. Phil rarely stopped mid-taping. But his hand was up, his expression serious, his full attention on Sarah. He turned to the production crew. Clear the front row. I need the family therapist and our crisis counselor on standby. Now. Producers scrambled. This wasn't in the rundown. This wasn't planned. Dr. Phil stood up from his chair and walked over to Sarah. He didn't sit back down in his host chair. Instead, he pulled up a small stool directly beside her, close enough that they could have been having a private conversation in a living room rather than on national television. Sarah, he said quietly, I need you to know something. What you just read to us, that's not your shame to carry. That was never your shame. Do you understand me? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. How long have you been carrying this diary around? Dr. Phil asked. 20 years, Sarah whispered. I've had it in my car, in my purse, under my bed. I've never let it out of my sight because it's the only proof that it really happened. That I didn't imagine it. That it was real. Dr. Phil paused mid-sentence. The studio went completely silent. He looked directly into the camera, not at Sarah, but at the millions of people who would eventually watch this moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had heard thousands of stories, but still felt the impact of each one. If you're watching this at home right now, and you're carrying something like this, a secret, a shame, a pain that you think is yours alone to bear, I want you to understand something. He gestured to Sarah. This woman has been in prison for 20 years. Not a prison with bars, but a prison of silence. And today, she's walking out. He turned back to Sarah. Tell me what you need. Sarah took a shaky breath. I need my family to know. I need them to stop pretending it never happened. I need. She broke down completely. I just need someone to believe me. Dr. Phil nodded slowly. Who's here today? My mother, Sarah said. She's in the green room. She doesn't know about the diary. She doesn't know I kept records. Off camera, Dr. Phil made a choice no producer expected. He stood up, walked to the edge of the stage, and spoke directly to his senior producer. Bring her mother out here. But first, I want Sarah to decide something. He turned back to Sarah. Do you want to read from this diary in front of your mother? Do you want her to hear these words? Because once you do, there's no going back. This becomes real in a way it's never been before. Sarah clutched the diary to her chest. For a long moment, she said nothing. The audience watched. The crew watched. Dr. Phil waited with infinite patience. Finally, Sarah nodded. I want her to hear it. I need her to hear it. But what happened next is something no one in the room, or watching at home, saw coming. Dr. Phil signaled to production. Bring her out. The studio doors opened. An older woman in her 60s walked onto the stage, looking confused and slightly annoyed at the delay. She sat down in the chair that had been placed opposite Sarah. Mom, Sarah said, her voice steadier now. There's something I need you to hear. Her mother's face hardened. Sarah, we've been through this. I don't know why you insist on. June 14, 1994. Sarah interrupted, opening the diary. Dad came home angry again. Mom said it was my fault for leaving my shoes in the hallway. Her mother's face went white. Sarah continued reading. Entry after entry. Date after date. A chronicle of abuse, neglect, and the systematic silencing of a child who had nowhere else to turn but the pages of a book. When Sarah finished reading, she closed the diary and looked at her mother. You told me no one would believe me. You told me it was my imagination. But I wrote it all down, Mom. Every single day. Every single time you looked away. Every single time you chose him over me." Her mother sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and something else, recognition. The recognition that comes when denial finally crumbles under the weight of documented truth. Dr. Phil leaned forward. "Ma'am, your daughter just read you 20 years of her life. 20 years of pain that she documented in real time. What do you have to say to her?" The mother's hands trembled. She opened her mouth several times, but no sound came out. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, I didn't know it was that bad." "You didn't know?" Sarah's voice rose. "Or you didn't want to know?" The confrontation that followed wasn't loud or dramatic. It was something more powerful. It was honest. Dr. Phil facilitated the conversation with the skill of someone who understood that healing doesn't always look like reconciliation. Sometimes healing looks like truth finally being spoken aloud. Sometimes it looks like a daughter holding her mother accountable. Sometimes it looks like a diary being read on national television because that's the only way the words inside it would ever be heard. The mother admitted things she'd never admitted before. She cried. She apologized. But Dr. Phil made something clear to both of them: an apology doesn't erase 20 years. It doesn't invalidate the diary. It doesn't make the pain disappear. "Sarah," Dr. Phil said, "you came here today looking for validation. You came here looking for someone to believe you. I want you to know that everyone in this room believes you. Everyone watching this believes you. And more importantly, you need to believe you." He pointed to the diary. "That book right there? That's not just a record of your past. That's evidence of your strength. Because a child who survives what you survived, who documents it, who holds on to it for 20 years until she's finally ready to speak it aloud, that's not weakness. That's warrior-level strength. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten." As the taping concluded, Dr. Phil did something else unusual. He held up the diary and addressed the camera directly. "This object right here represents something we don't talk about enough in our society. The burden of proof that victims carry. Sarah carried this diary for 2 decades because she knew that one day someone would question her truth. So she documented it. She became her own witness." He placed the diary gently back in Sarah's hands. "This is yours. It always has been. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face, but for the first time since she'd walked onto that stage, she was smiling. Dr. Phil arranged for Sarah to receive ongoing therapy through the show's partnership with licensed trauma specialists. He provided resources for family counseling, though Sarah made it clear she needed space from her mother before any reconciliation could even be considered. Most importantly, he validated what Sarah had known all along: her truth mattered. In the weeks following the episode's broadcast, the impact was overwhelming. The show received over 50,000 emails from people who had similar stories. People who had documented their own abuse in diaries, journals, notes hidden in drawers. The hashtag Diary of Truth trended worldwide. Therapists reported an increase in clients bringing forward evidence of trauma they'd been carrying in silence. Sarah's story had opened a door that many people hadn't known existed. It had given permission to speak. It had validated the instinct to document, to record, to create evidence when you fear you won't be believed. Dr. Phil spoke about the episode in interviews afterward, calling it one of the most important moments of his career. "People ask me all the time what makes a good television moment," he said. "But this wasn't about television. This was about a woman who trusted me with her truth. And that's not something you take lightly." The diary remained with Sarah, but it was no longer her only witness. She started a blog called Pages of Truth, where survivors could share their stories. She partnered with domestic violence organizations to provide journals to at-risk youth, encouraging them to document their experiences, not just for therapy, but for the record. For the day when they might need to prove what they survived. Her mother attended therapy separately and, after 6 months, wrote Sarah a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A handwritten letter acknowledging the specific entries Sarah had read aloud. Acknowledging the specific dates. Acknowledging that silence had been complicity. They haven't fully reconciled. Sarah isn't sure they ever will. But the truth is out. The secret is no longer secret. And the diary that once felt like a burden now feels like what it always was, evidence of survival. Dr. Phil kept a copy of one entry from Sarah's diary in his office. Not the whole book, that remained Sarah's. But one entry that she'd given him permission to keep. It was dated March 17, 1998, the day she'd written about counting down until she could leave. 847 days until I turn 18. I'm counting. Below it, Sarah had written a new entry in 2024. 9,497 days since I turned 18. I'm free. That's the entry Dr. Phil keeps. Because it reminds him why he does this work. It reminds him that behind every guest who walks onto his stage, there's a story. Behind every story, there's pain. And behind every pain, there's a chance, just a chance, for healing. The episode taught America something important. Validation isn't just about believing victims. It's about understanding that many victims have already documented their truth. They've already done the work of bearing witness to themselves. What they need from the rest of us is simple acknowledgement. We see you. We believe you. And you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Years later, Dr. Phil would say that the diary episode changed how he approached his work. He became more attuned to the objects people brought with them. The letters. The photographs. The keepsakes. Because these weren't just props or dramatic elements for television. They were anchors. They were proof. They were the physical manifestations of pain that had nowhere else to go. Sarah's diary taught him that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone isn't to solve their problem. It's to witness their truth. To create space for it. To say, I hear you. And what you experience matters. That worn, brown leather diary changed lives. Not because it contained shocking revelations that made for good television. But because it represented something universal, the human need to be believed. The human need to matter. The human need to know that your pain is real and valid and worthy of acknowledgement. And on that day in the Dr. Phil studio, when Sarah read those pages aloud and her mother finally heard them, that need was met. The silence was broken. The truth was spoken. And the diary, the faithful witness to 20 years of suffering, finally got to rest. Because its job was done. The story had been told. And Sarah was free.